and thank you for the correction on Geneva College. I think Geneva College, Hobby Lobby, these are two of potentially thousands of businesses and Catholic institutions and religious institutions that may likely have an issue with this. You know, there are companies we know, like Chick-fil-A, and then thousands that we've never heard of that could potentially have an issue with this and go to court over it. So how big are the ramifications of Geneva College and Hobby Lobby winning these suits this week?
Well, you know, their two lawsuits are just two of the 36 lawsuits that have been filed already on behalf of 110 plaintiffs. And these run the gamut from for-profit businesses like Hobby Lobby all the way down to the soup kitchens and Catholic charities and faith-based institutions of education. And they're asserting very important claims that will set tremendous precedents for religious freedom. One of the most troubling arguments that the government has been making is that people in business can't exercise religion at all, and therefore it's impossible for the government to burden their religion. This is a stunning and shocking argument. The second thing that the government has argued, and again, the concern about precedent is very serious here, is that, well, we're going to second guess your theology. In our judgment, this doesn't burden your religious exercise enough in order to amount to anything that can be litigated in court. There was one judge who went the wrong way on one of these cases who reasoned precisely that way. He said, I know you say this violates your conscience, this constitutes cooperation in evil, but I don't buy it. I disagree with you, and I'm therefore throwing out your case. So the government's arguments are very dangerous, and each one of these cases sets a precedent. That's why my organization, Alliance Defending Freedom, and others are working so hard to protect religious freedom across this country.
Greg, I'm wondering if you could actually break down a little bit more of your argument on why businesses can't practice their faith. I mean, couldn't theoretically anybody just say, you know, I am Christian or I'm a Muslim and I have this business, so this business now, you know, associates with my faith? How are you sort of making that argument, and why do you suggest that this is sort of a ridiculous claim by the government?
Well, you know, the way the First Amendment is written, it says that we all have freedom. We all have the freedom to exercise, to engage in speech, to exercise our religion. The main religious freedom statute that Congress passed by tremendous bipartisan majorities back in 1994 says persons have the right to exercise freedom. It doesn't say just some narrow category of religious organizations have religious freedom. We all have religious freedom. You know, that's a point that really disturbs me about what the government is saying, is they're saying, no, we're confining religious freedom very narrowly. They have acknowledged that there is some religious interest at stake here, but they've only protected this very extremely, shockingly narrow category of religious employers like churches and monasteries. In fact, if a religious organization serves people outside its faith community, if you give anyone the bowl of soup, you are deemed no longer to be a religious organization by the government, and you're thus subject to the mandate. So in our view, anyone can exercise religion, and everyone has the freedom of religion, and it should be protected.
The question of how narrowly you define religious exemptions, that's essentially what we're talking about here. Buck, you and I on this program, many times in talking about Obamacare and its effect on religious liberties, have had this conversation. So let's just, for the sake of the viewer, just re-indulge a little bit of that legal history to say that it all stems from a Native American, Indian, peyote case wherein
Employment Division v. Smith.
Division versus Smith, where the Supreme Court said that Native Americans don't have a constitutionally protected right to use peyote under religious principles. Now, in response to that, Congress came in and adopted the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, which said we're going to judge very harshly any law that intrudes upon religious liberties. But here's the question that remains, Buck, and I asked you even before we sat down tonight. How are we going to define religion? What is going to be the generally accepted concept of religion?
I think we're finding out how the government defines religion right now. There's actually not a whole lot, as far as I'm aware, of constitutional precedent on this issue. There's statutory precedent, which you're talking about, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That raises the bar. That makes it harder for the federal government to pass laws that may infringe upon freedom. They have to, religious freedom. They have to prove a compelling state interest, and they have to also prove that there's not a better way to do this. And it sounds like that the challenges you're seeing here to this early stage of Obamacare in fact, might fail upon that sort of statutory side of things, because on the First Amendment side, as we saw, Scalia wrote the opinion for Employment Division v. Smith, and he said, look, if the state has a compelling interest in not allowing certain substances, your religious freedom does not override that. So the RFRA came after that. We'll see if that actually holds here.